On the morning of August 2nd, 216 BC, a Roman consul named Gaius Terentius Varro stood on a flat, sun-bleached plain in southern Italy and stared at the largest army Rome had ever assembled. 86,000 men, 8 full legions, doubled in strength, plus an equal force of allied infantry and cavalry. They stretched across the Apulian plain in a formation so deep and so dense that nothing on earth should have been able to stop them. Across the field, a Carthaginian army of roughly 50,000 waited in the heat. They were outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. They had no supply lines, no reinforcements, no elephants, no route home. By every calculation that mattered, this should have been the day Rome crushed the foreign invader who had been burning Italian farmland for 2 years. What nobody knew at the time was that by sunset, somewhere between 40 and 70,000 Romans would be dead. The largest and most powerful army in the ancient world would cease to exist in a single afternoon. And the man who destroyed it would do so using the oldest trick in warfare, a trick so simple that 22 centuries later, military academies around the world still teach it as the most perfect tactical encirclement ever executed. This is the story of Hannibal Barca and the Battle of Cannae. And to understand how it happened, you need to understand the world he was born into. By the middle of the 3rd century BC, Rome was the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. It had conquered the Italian peninsula, absorbed or allied with nearly every city-state and tribe south of the Po Valley, and built a military system unlike anything the ancient world had seen. Roman legions did not rely on individual genius, they relied on a system, standardized training, standardized equipment, rotating command between 2 consuls elected every year. If one army was destroyed, Rome simply raised another, and another, and another. The Roman Republic had manpower reserves that no rival could match because its network of alliances across Italy gave it access to hundreds of thousands of fighting men. Carthage was the only power that had ever matched Rome at sea and on land. The First Punic War had ended in 241 BC, with Carthage defeated, stripped of Sicily, and forced to pay a massive indemnity. Then, while Carthage was distracted by a brutal mercenary revolt, Rome seized Sardinia and Corsica and increased the fine. It was an act of naked opportunism, and the man who felt that humiliation most deeply was a Carthaginian general named Hannibal Barca, a man who would raise his eldest son to finish what he could not. Hannibal was 9 years old when his father took him to a temple altar and made him place his hand on a sacrificial animal and swear an oath. The ancient historian Polybius records the words as a promise never to be a friend of Rome. The later Roman historian Livy hardened it into something closer to eternal hatred. Whether the exact wording was political or personal, the effect was the same. From that moment, Hannibal's life had a single purpose. Hamilcar took the boy to Spain, where Carthage was building a new empire to replace what Rome had taken. Hannibal grew up not in palaces or schools, but in military camps on the Iberian frontier. He learned to ride before he could read. He watched his father wage war against hostile tribes, negotiate alliances with Iberian chieftains, and forge an army out of mercenaries who owed Carthage nothing but their contract. He learned that loyalty was not inherited, it was earned. Every day. When Hamilcar died in battle in 228 BC, command passed to his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair, who expanded Carthaginian territory through diplomacy and founded New Carthage as a capital. The young Hannibal served as an officer under Hasdrubal, learning logistics, siegecraft, and the art of managing men who did not share his language or his gods. When Hasdrubal was assassinated in 221 BC, the army acclaimed the 26-year-old Hannibal as their commander. The soldiers chose him, not Carthage's senate, not its merchants. The men who would have to fight and die under his orders. He was young, he was untested in supreme command, and he had inherited an army that was not an army in any traditional sense. It was a coalition of strangers. Libyan heavy infantry from the farms and cities of North Africa, Numidian light cavalry, the finest horsemen in the Mediterranean, who fought without saddles or bridles. Iberian swordsmen carrying the deadly falcata, Celtic warriors from Gaul who fought bare-chested and screaming, Balearic slingers from the islands off Spain who could put a lead bullet through a man's skull at 100 paces. These men spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, ate different food, and had no loyalty to Carthage as a nation. Their loyalty was to Hannibal personally. He spoke their languages. He ate what they ate. He slept on the ground when they slept on the ground. That fact would matter more than anyone realized. In the spring of 218 BC, Hannibal marched out of Spain with roughly 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. His destination was Italy. His route was over the Alps. The crossing took approximately 16 days through some of the most brutal terrain in Europe. Mountain tribes ambushed the column in narrow passes, rolling boulders onto men and animals trapped on ledges with no room to fight back. Pack horses and mules slipped off cliff edges and fell silently into gorges hundreds of feet below. Snow and ice made every step a gamble. Soldiers who stopped to rest froze where they sat. The army climbed through blizzards, navigated rockfalls that blocked entire paths, and ate whatever they could find, which toward the end was almost nothing. By the time the army descended into the Po Valley, Hannibal had lost nearly half his force. He arrived in Italy with roughly 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, half-starved, frostbitten, wearing rags. The elephants survived the crossing, but would all be dead within the year, killed by the Italian winter and disease. No foreign army had ever crossed the Alps into Italy. The Romans had expected to fight in Spain or North Africa. They had positioned their consular armies accordingly. Instead, the war was on their doorstep. And the Gauls of northern Italy, recently conquered and deeply resentful of Roman rule, began flocking to Hannibal's banner by the thousands. His gamble, which should have killed his army, had placed him exactly where Rome least expected him to be. What followed was a sequence of disasters for Rome that had no precedent in the Republic's history. At the Trebia River in December of 218 BC, Hannibal lured an entire Roman army across a freezing river at dawn, then struck it from three sides. Thousands of Romans died in the icy water. At Lake Trasimene in June of 217 BC, he executed what many historians call the largest ambush in military history, trapping a Roman army of 25,000 on the misty shore of a lake and destroying it in 3 hours. The consul Gaius Flaminius was killed. 15,000 Romans died. The survivors were captured almost to a man. Rome panicked. The Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus as dictator, and Fabius adopted a strategy of avoidance. He shadowed Hannibal. He harassed foraging parties. He refused battle. He believed that time and attrition would bleed the Carthaginian army dry. He was right. But Rome did not have the patience for it. Politicians mocked Fabius as a coward. His own subordinate, Marcus Minucius Rufus, openly challenged him. The Roman people wanted blood, not caution. When Fabius's term expired, the Senate returned to aggressive command and elected 2 new consuls with a mandate to end the war in a single stroke. For 216 BC, Rome raised the largest army in its history. 8 legions, each doubled to 5,000 men, plus an equal number of allied troops. Roughly 86,000 soldiers marched south to find Hannibal and destroy him. The plan was simple. Mass the infantry in an unusually deep formation, drive straight into the Carthaginian center, overwhelm them with sheer weight of numbers, crush them. Hannibal had roughly 50,000 men. He chose the ground carefully, a flat plain near the village of Cannae on the Aufidus River in Apulia. He positioned his army so the Romans would face east into the morning sun and the hot, dust-laden wind. Then he made a decision that, on its face, looked suicidal. Pay attention to this detail because it explains everything that happened next. He placed his weakest troops, the Gauls and Iberians, in the center of his line. But he did not place them flat. He pushed them forward